Hey, I'm Cyrus Alderwood. How's everybody doing tonight?
Cyrus is an awesome guy. He has been a friend of the show for a very long time. He's been on the show quite a while ago. So he's a very successful author. Cyrus and I have gotten to know each other over the years, and he gets into the nitty gritty of some of the coolest stuff. So tonight, we are going to be doing a murder and mystery segment and series. And tonight, we're going to be going over the SS Ourang Medan, which is a boat that had a full crew on it, and a lot of crazy stuff happened. I don't want to go too far into it, but this is in the part of the world where it's Malaysia and Indonesia. So it is, the current traffic is 100,000 ships that sail through there for merchant. It was the merchant marine highway, really. So it's a lot of oil tankers and all types of deliveries. Back in the day, it was a spice trade. So to travel back into the 1940s, the SS Ourang Medan was sailing. And they, from my research, they took off from a very small port in China, and they were headed to Costa Rica. It wasn't clear what they had on the ship. There's no record of the boat under its current name that it was sailing when it was found from its SOS signal, because it had a very strange situation, right? Right, Cyrus? So I want you to pick it up from here. Tell us an overview of what happened. Why did the SOS signal happen that came across and actually got recognized by 3 different countries, 3 different boats that were coming to rescue them, and what they saw?
Yeah, this is a weird ghost ship mystery. And to this day, people question whether it's truth or a myth. So from one of the first dates that I came across in June of 1947, which we don't think is June by the weather, but a Dutch vessel that was manned by people of Asian descent. They don't know which country they were from, but probably from somewhere there, either China or parts of Indonesia. They were traveling through the Marshall Islands when the boat had an issue. The SS Ourang Medan had an issue, and they sent out an SOS. And the SOS reads, and this was all Morse code: "We float. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Possibly whole crew dead." Then there were a bunch of inaudible. They couldn't make out what the dots and dashes were. It didn't make any sense. And then it was followed up by, "I die." That was the last transmission that went out. There were some ships that were in range. One of them was the SS City of Baltimore. It had a doctor on board. They were initially going to respond to the SOS call, but there was another boat that was probably about 300 miles closer, nautical miles closer, the SS Silver Star. So the SS Silver Star answers the SOS call. And when they get there, Elizabeth, the craziest stuff, they get there, they board the boat. And you want to tell everybody what they found when they
Yeah, absolutely. I have an excerpt, and I think it would probably be best if I read it, because this thing is really kind of crazy, rattling around in my brain. And, of course, when you hear of a mystery, a serial killer from long ago or something like that, I always want to know the backstory. I'm always trying to figure it out ahead of time. So the story goes like this, as far as what I researched. And if it's different from yours, I really want to chat about that. But when the Silver Star crew eventually located and boarded the apparently undamaged Ourang Medan in an attempt at a rescue, the ship was found littered with corpses, including a carcass of a dog, everywhere. The dead bodies found sprawled on their backs, the frozen, like they had these frozen, frightened faces, and their mouths are described to be just gaping open like a growl, like their eyes are bulging. And it was just really creepy and bizarre, because every single person, everything on the ship had that same rigid, wide eyes, open mouth. And it was like rigor mortis had set in early for whatever happened. So, the corpses resembled just like horrible characters, it says. And they looked for injuries, they looked for possibly a pirate attack, because there's still a lot of piracy in that strait right now today. So of course it definitely has always been. And they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find anything of a human attack. No injuries, wounds, nothing.
Yeah, it was the craziest thing. Even the dog had a look of fear, like snarling on its face. And some of the crew, like you said, were face down. Some that I read were actually laying on their backs and face upward. And you have to wonder what in the world would inspire such fear that everybody just sort of dropped dead where they were at. And it reminded me of that movie from 1980, John Carpenter's movie called The Fog. Do you remember? I love watching that every Halloween. But there's a ghost ship, and if anybody's ever seen The Fog, there's a ship that goes out, a local ship that goes out for overnight fishing. They never return, but when they find the crew, it's kind of like the Ourang Medan. They're all frozen in fear, and literally frozen, like cold. It's really cold. When they got on board, according to the weather, according to people that were on the SS Silver Star, there was one what do you call those, lifeboats that were missing?
Right.
And it was about 110 degrees. They said 100 to 110 degrees. And when they got on the boat, it was so recognizably cold. I mean, they said really cold. So why was the boat cold if it's 110 degrees outside or 100 degrees? It's just that itself did not make sense.
And you know what? That still doesn't make sense, except for my mind going to, okay, something chemical. There's
Right.
some sort of chemical reaction happening that's going to cause that cold. Because yeah, you're right. 100 degrees out. It's the middle of their summer. And the newspaper clipping that I have here that I just showed in the stream, it does have a picture from the ship of one of the sailors, and he's you can't see too much because it's so very old. But this publication does fact check out. It is all in Dutch. I know a little bit of German. I don't know Dutch. So I threw that thing into Google Translate and found some of the headlines to be really, really interesting. I also found a date on this, which is why I was going back to February. So I'll show that in the stream here. So this publication, which the name of the publication is, it's like a transportation newspaper. And at first I thought maybe I was just looking at the transportation segment of the newspaper. And I finally was able to scroll back through to the front page. And it is called, again, I don't know Dutch, but De Locomotief, which is of locomotives, if you're to translate that into English. And they opened up their publication house in 1943. So this is said to have happened, to be reported of happening. So I'd say it's within a week or so of February 3rd, and that's a Tuesday, 1948, which the weather would line up, because that would be, I mean, that's Singapore. So that would be their summer.
Yeah. And the other dates that I think you and I both found were like, I just mentioned June of 47.
I saw that one too.
I saw July of 47. I've seen 1948. I've seen, I did find a record, not an official record, but somebody else writing about it, that said they had found articles going back to 1939 that mentioned the Ourang Medan, which, you got to think, well, I mean, that's a big span of years.
Yeah.
So what was it? And the first official mention of it in the West was in a newspaper in 1952.
Right.
Right. So it took 10, 15 years, or 10 years maybe, or at least 6 before it got here. And,
1952 is when we actually had officials starting looking into it, right? Was it the CIA that actually opened up that case and was looking into it to try to figure out what happened?
They did. They did actually open a case. I want to get back to the Silver Star just for a moment, because while these people were on board searching and finding these bodies, one of the things that the captain thought was maybe it was carbon monoxide poisoning. Let's get everybody off the boat. They worried about their safety. So there was smoke out of nowhere, a boat that was unharmed, nothing touched. Suddenly there was smoke rising up from bottom part of the boat. So they got everybody off and got back to the Silver Star because they were going to tow it back in. But at that just backed away far enough from the boat. And then there was a giant explosion moments later. And one record that I read that the explosion was so big that it literally lifted the Medan up out of the water and came back down before it actually turned to its side and started sinking.
See, and that makes a whole lot of sense because to me, because of this rumor. So there's a rumor that they were not on any of the sailing logs. And what was the Lloyd's sailing log? Is that correct?
Lloyd's shipping.
Yeah. The Lloyd, they were not listed on the Lloyd's register because it was kind of a hush, carrying. They had chemicals on board.
Yeah, smugglers are not going to obviously register their ships or whatever they're doing.
Right. And so what I could find was that they were supposed to be smuggling potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. So cyanide, I was looking that up, and that's going to have the effects to where it can be an airborne release of cyanide gas in the form of hydrogen cyanide, right? And it dispenses quickly in open spaces. So for the people above and outside, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it does cause headache, hypotension, and acute lung injury. So for their faces to be like possibly suffocating, grasping for air, and your eyes, I guess, would bug out, and your mouth is going to be like air. But I'm not sure that holds a whole lot of water for the people that are actually up on deck.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense either, unless they were contaminated below at some point over time, and maybe. But then they all wouldn't have dropped dead so quick, not at the same time. That really doesn't make sense.
But the nitroglycerin, that night, I cannot talk this evening. The nitroglycerin makes a whole lot of sense for the explosion. Exactly. To actually lift that thing up out of the water and be like this magnanimous explosion. That makes sense.
But what kind of chemical, I was wondering, you said, what kind of chemical would make it so cold on the boat?
That I couldn't find. So I was researching, I was hoping to find that the cyanide would do that, or you would think that it would be the two of them together, the nitroglycerin and the cyanide, because what I was finding was if there was a leak in the ship and any of this got wet, the nitroglycerin would explode and the cyanide can become airborne. So I thought, well, that makes sense because then you have the two of them coming together. But I couldn't find anything as far as Google research about the combination of the two, the combustibility, and what does that do? Could it cause the cold air?
Or was there a chemical down there that required them to keep it very cold?
Oh, like dry ice.
Mm-hmm. Is that a possibility? Because the thing that I immediately thought is, okay, the time frame we're talking about, if it's 1947, World War II is over. The Cold War has started.
Right.
So would it be possible that they were shipping some sort of bioweapon or biochemical that they did not want known to another location for research or study, and then things went wrong? Or if it was not, if we take the dates from 1939, we're in the middle of World War II.
We are.
Are we studying those types of things to make sure that Hitler or the Japanese are not getting ahead of us in that research to use those types of weapons? Or maybe was potentially we were going to use those? Because there's a very interesting part that I found, and you mentioned the CIA earlier. There's so much out there that you could question whether this even existed. But the CIA archives, you can find on their reading room. There was a letter from a guy by the name of C.H. Mark Jr. in 1959 written to the director of the CIA's assistant. Now, at the time, I think it was the CIA director was Dulles.
Okay.
And it can be found in the reading room. And essentially what the guy was writing was, what did the CIA know about the Ourang Medan? Something I guess this guy who had written letters before, he'd written several letters. So it's not like this guy was a stranger. They were getting letters on different topics from this guy. But they actually sent a response back on this one. And it was just one of those generic responses like, well, we'll look into it. Just kind of blew him off, right? To satisfy him, like, we'll look into it. But the particular letter that guy wrote about the Ourang Medan, not all the other letters this guy wrote, but that particular letter gets classified and is not released until 2002. Because he was inquiring about what kind of chemicals were on the boat, and has anybody, I guess, went to retrieve it. And the answer to the secret to what happened still lies at the bottom of the sea with the Ourang Medan.
And the other part of that I couldn't find was it talks about the boat possibly having these chemicals on it. Now, I guess that does make a little bit of sense. As I did some research, I did find that those two chemicals are used in not only weapon making for World War II, but construction.
Yep.
But there's no real concrete evidence or anybody saying that this was on the ship, because from what I can hear and what I can see is that the Silver Star reached the ship. They got on, they saw this horrific scene of everybody dead. And then before they knew it, they cut ties with the ship as they were going to tow it back to shore because it caught on fire. And that fire quickly turned, like you said, into this massive explosion. So did anybody see chemicals? Like, is there any proof of like barrels? Somebody out there said that they saw chemicals, or is it that's just one of the random straws that everybody's grabbing at?
Yeah, that's the thing. There was actually a question as to whether the Silver Star even existed itself. Now, you can find the Silver Star on Lloyd's shipping register.
Right.
But that particular ship wasn't even built until 1942. So that kind of puts the 1939 date
to rest.
In 1942, though, it was called the Cecilia. So it wasn't even called the Silver Star. It didn't change its name to the Silver Star until 1946, but only after, a year, it only kept that name. Then it changed names to Santa Juana. And that boat itself was scrapped in 1971. So only for a year was it called the Silver Star, which is kind of interesting. But I can see in history and like in hindsight, people, maybe that one particular boat, because it's known for that, everyone called it the Silver Star, just by default for all those years. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
John Cougar Mellencamp went to John Mellencamp, and I still call him John Cougar. You know what I mean? It's like
totally
names, but it's one name will stick, right? So that's possible. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you. All of that is, so many different things are possible. The one thing that's kind of way out there that I cannot wrap my brain around is an alien invasion. And that's, in my research, that's one of the hypotheses of what happened. Was there was some sort of alien invasion. So then I'm going to think they think the whole crew just dropped dead of being scared to death.
Well, if they were afraid of the probe, I can maybe see that, but there's all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories of what really happened. I found a really interesting page here, and I will I'll post this up and I'll email it to you if you want to share it online too.
We can go over it right now if you tell me what the URL is.
It's de173.com.
Okay.
And then / the dash SS dash Ourang dash Medan / And I'm about a third of the way down the page. This is a really, really good site that covers a lot of the stuff. There's actually a book written about it. I had no idea, but this was a book. I don't think you can find it anymore, but it was mentioned in the article. And I just want to pick up on this one part and read. On July 12th, 1947, a good 3 weeks later, a lifeboat was washed ashore on the island of Taongi, which is part of the Marshall Islands. Of the 7 passengers, 6 had already died. The last surviving person was cared for by a missionary. The person allegedly was the second officer of the Ourang Medan, called Jerry Rabbit. According to his information, Ourang Medan had arrived in Balast, Shanghai on June 7th of 47, where Rabbit was recruited. The ship's command of the steamer, however, strangely enough, did not want to see any papers from him. The now second officer suspected that a large proportion of the crew had been recruited in a similar manner. According to Rabbit's information, it was an originally Chinese steamer, which had 9th, 1947, in a small harbor about 80 nautical miles south of Shanghai. A good 8,000 boxes were taken on board again. Rabbit suspected that the entire cargo was contraband. Now, this is from supposedly someone that survived this. Maybe got off on that lifeboat with a few others, and those died. He was the only survivor.
Now, I heard about that guy, and I'm like, wait a minute, but everybody was supposed to be dead. There wasn't any survivors. So
yeah.
So
there's another twist in the story, and the fact
right.
that they wanted no papers from the guy. It's almost like, we are doing contraband. We are, and all, for all intents and purposes, a pirate ship themselves. They're smugglers on the high seas. For what ends, who knows? The fact that the CIA knew of this and classified a letter for 50 years, I'm likely to believe that the story actually happened, whether we can pin down the exact dates.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I tried to find was, has there ever been an attempt to rescue the contents of the Ourang Medan, or anybody trying to find it? Because there's always people out, off the coast of Carolina, always searching for ships that are sunk and treasure. These people are all over the place. They're all over the world. I've found not one instance where anybody ever tried to resurrect or investigate the Ourang Medan or find it.
I couldn't find anything within any of the sources out there through Google, and you do kind of have to dig. I found myself, really, really digging through here, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then you try to validate it. So then you're going back into the backstory, like, is this a real publication? Is this a real person? Is this? And it's just bizarre because no, there doesn't seem to be any exhume orders or expeditions to try to go find it, to go get it. I don't know. But then they also say, because of the high traffic, like I had said, so many boats coming through that strait, that there are so many of them that have sunk.
Yeah, lots. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many boats have sunk on our seas. The hundreds of thousands over time. And if anybody wants to look up some of the old articles that you can find on this, I'm just going to toss out a couple if anybody that's watching wants to jot down notes and look it up. The San Francisco Examiner on October 3rd of 1948 on page 33. It was a very short article basically announcing the secrets of the sea. And the same piece also on the same day was in the Atlanta Constitution. The Atlanta Constitution on October 10th of 1948 had another article titled Secrets of the Sea. There was, I think, a series of this. Back to the Examiner on October 10th of 1948 on pages 24 and 25. Same two-page spread as the Atlanta. The Windsor Star in Ontario, Canada, actually run an article on August 9th of 69. And so if anybody wants to kind of look those things up, on that page, the website I just gave you, there's a list of all this stuff too. You can find all that. But you said aliens as one of the potential conspiracy theories. I found quite a few conspiracy theories.
What was your
on this? Well, the first one that popped up was methane, a deadly greenhouse gas that naturally escapes the ocean seabed that could have enveloped the ship. Right. Okay. Here, I'm just kind of reading this from what I printed. Sound scientific explanation of how the crew could have been killed with no sign of harm, and how the ship may have exploded when the gases mixed with the boiler room. Sounds good on paper, but it seems the 2 cents, even the death of the crew and the arrival of the rescue ship hours later, were too far apart to make it plausible. An unfound, undetected smoldering fire malfunctioned in the boiler system. Seawater breached the hold. Its reaction with these deadly chemicals, like you mentioned, they were toxic gases. Pirates could have had something to do with it. There are theories claiming that pirates invaded Ourang Medan and killed everyone on board. Problems with this theory is clear. It doesn't explain some accounts saying that there were no visible wounds on the victims' bodies.
Right.
Doesn't explain the SOS message or of any attack. But, that, like you said, that Strait of Malacca had a huge history of piracy. It was just a dangerous area for like 50 years. Morris Jessup in 1955 put forth the theory that the crew might have been attacked by UFOs prior to their deaths, given the apparent absence of a natural cause, the reportedly terrified expressions on their faces of the deceased, and rumors that some of the dead were pointing towards an unknown enemy. I hadn't read anything about them pointing anywhere. Ghosts or paranormal activity.
They weren't all dead, like with their hand pointing.
The aliens did. Ghosts or paranormal activity. That was, I don't know. I would probably saw a ghost. Yeah. So anyway, I guess paranormal, like if you want to talk about why things are cold, paranormal researchers say that when you get in areas where there's heavy paranormal or ghost activity or demonic activity, temperatures drop drastically.
I've heard that. I have definitely heard that, but I don't know, a whole crew and a dog just
and a dog. I mean, who messes with the dog?
Like dying of being scared to death. That I don't know. I think that would have to happen more often for me to buy into that. The chemical thing makes a lot of sense. And it does make sense that they would be smuggling chemicals. So I think my vote's going to be with it had to be some sort of chemical reaction between the two, and the explosion is definitely plausible. The death by cyanide, was it cyanide? No, it was
carbon monoxide.
Yeah, it was cyanide. It was the death by cyanide, just airborne throughout, like everybody and the dog and everybody. I don't know. I don't know that they would all drop dead with advanced rigor mortis just like that.
Yeah.
Unless the two chemicals, the nitroglycerin and the cyanide together, make a very deadly concoction.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, but
I wouldn't know either.
Or the other only plausible thing is also a chemical, but something that was military based, something that was in a lab for bio or chemical warfare purposes, and of course they're going to smuggle it because you're breaking every global treaty at that point. But
right.
Yeah. So the question was out there, like, did this really happen, or is this just a myth? My vote is it actually happened. Simply, the CIA was actually taking part of classifying a simple letter that even mentioned it for 50 years.
Yeah, I would say for me, once the CIA actually got involved so many years later, I would say that, yes, this actually did happen, and it's going to be military based. I mean, just nitroglycerin here in my notes, it says it was manufactured during World War I and World War II for use as military propellants and in military engineering works. In its pure form, nitroglycerin is a contact explosive with physical shock causing it to explode and is highly dangerous to transport. So just with that right there, I think the death in my mind is still a strong mystery. Cyanide was one of those things. It's kind of weird. They were still in the early 1900s. They were still selling that at drugstores as a skin lightener for women.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. Well, that's the next girl I want to get into for our next show. Yeah, she's pretty crazy. She killed a whole bunch of them with cyanide. But yeah, you could go to your local druggist and get cyanide, and that was one of the things was they would put it on their face as a skin lightener.
Wow.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
So, well, this is very interesting. I'm glad that you brought it to light and you suggested it. I had a crash course on Dutch, which I realized how much I don't like trying to read
Yeah,
Dutch.
I was looking like, what language is this? I've seen German, even though I can't read it. But I was looking, I was like, what? Like I didn't know if it was Greek. I had no clue.
Yeah. No,
But
and I was going through here. Some of the headlines in this newspaper is so interesting. Um, and it's so curious to me, kind of off subject, but if you go back to read old newspapers, you're reading the news story like it's some poetry or something. I mean, it's all this very colorful language and descriptive and like Shakespearean, terms of how the person's skin looked on the day that it was in the horizon. It's like, oh my God, just tell me what happened. So it's really interesting. But like one of their headlines is riddles will not be solved. And this one, I believe I have a picture of it. No, that's not the one. That's the soldier one. Oh, here it is. So this picture right here, let me bring it solo so we can see it. This is the boat, and this is supposed to be a picture of the ship sinking. And it says the burnt out wreck of the Ourang Medan shortly before it sank to the bottom of the ocean, taking him away. And I thought that was really curious that they used the verbiage taking him away, because I know ships to be referred to as she or her.
but the Orang Medan is actually translated into Man of Medan. Medan
Oh.
in Indonesia. And speaking of Man of Medan, there's actually a creepy video game, the first in a series that just came
Yeah.
out not long ago. It's called Man of Medan, and this legend even made its way to a video game. How cool is that?
Crazy. That's so crazy. Well, I've really enjoyed this chat. I want to do another one. Would you do another one with me?
Let's do them. I love these mysteries
All
because
right.
there's so many more questions than you're ever going to find answers, and they're
I know.
fast.
I know it. I have a couple of really cool girls. I want to look at women like serial murderers of the 1900s. And I have a few, maybe, have you ever heard of Belle Jeunesse?
No, I have not, but
Oh, she's a good one. Maybe we'll do one of those. So in the next few weeks, I'll link up with you again and we'll do another one of these shows. I hope everybody watching has really been entertained by some of our research and our papers flying and my pen going all over the place and us reading little facts and tidbits to you. And I've really enjoyed this. This has been cool. When you mentioned this at first, I had not heard of it. And I still do. You know what? I have one more question I forgot to ask earlier. What was the origin of the shipmates? Did you ever find that?
the origin, like their nationalities.
Yeah.
I read that one that I read was that they were all Asian descent. That they
Okay.
thought they were local sailors from different parts of Indonesia, Malaysia, Marshall Islands. And then when I read about the guy Rabbit that had been recruited in China and Shanghai, that they didn't want his papers. They probably just found a ragtag bunch of people to put together that would keep their mouths shut to transport whatever they had to transport. I did read one place though that it was said that from the survivor that they were all incredibly upset when they got on board. They told they were going to the first destination you meant, a destination to Australia, which was not,
Oh.
but to go all the way to Costa Rica,
Uh-huh.
such a stretch and such a long, dangerous trip with whatever they had on board that that they almost were going to have a mutiny. Like they were really upset that this was going on. So again,
Mm.
that is all speculation, but from what I read, it was sailors of from Southeast Asia.
That's an interesting speculation. You almost wonder, was it intentional poisoning?
Well, that I guess that would throw that out there, wouldn't it?
That would. I mean, that would be really twisted and bizarre. But if they're that upset and they figure that they're going to explode anyway when they hit some high seas.
And the one survivor, Jerry Rabbit, would he may have been the one who dispensed the poison. He survived. No one else did. Apparently, other people got on the lifeboat with him. He said 6 people survived. He was the only one.
That's really interesting. Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I had so much fun. I love this stuff.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on for this. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the next one. This is great.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, I'm going to see you in a couple weeks. We're going to be doing this on Mondays, as many Mondays as we possibly can. So possibly week after next. I think that actually brings us to the first week of February, if you can believe it. Like it feels like the days go so slow, but the years just go fast.
We have to remember now, this is the age of Aquarius. This is supposed to be good times, right? So let's keep our heads up above water.
Yeah, we're going to make it good times.
Keep our heads above water. No pun intended, folks. Hey,
all right. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Have a wonderful evening. And everybody, let's say goodbye together because this segment is our show. It's yours and mine. So have a good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Good night.
All right. Good night.